good news is I can teach you how to die peacefully too.
Speak the fuck up so I can hear
But first, I'm going to tell you how we got into this mess and how we can get out. As human beings, our lives are constantly in danger because we're constantly in a dilemma. We are hardwired to avoid pain, separations, and challenges to our sense of self-worth. And yet, no matter what we do all day long, constantly, we are confronted with pain, separations, and challenges to our sense of self-worth. And this dilemma creates a tension in our soul, a kind of dis-ease that we have to navigate over and over again, and we're not really that good at it. Kind of like how this internal struggle is like the precipice for even war. But there's a solution. We can fix it. The way to address this dilemma is to learn to reorient our understanding of how life really works. This means rereading dynamically the life events that trigger the dilemma over and over again. Now, reading differently and dynamically, that's what I do. As Rob said, I am a sociocultural lyricist. I collect life stories for people inside of schools and outside of schools, and I interpret the ways that people read, write, and talk about their identities and their experiences. Now, I've been doing this for over 10 years. And my work has always been implicitly based on a fundamental idea that I never thought to question, and I bet you would never question it either. It's that life precedes death. So that we're doing this. We experience a birth, we experience a life, and we experience a death. But actually, this isn't true. That's not what we're doing. The presence of our dilemma precludes this configuration. The presence of our dilemma means that we're experiencing more pain and more disorder than we acknowledge. So actually, the truth is death precedes life. The quality of our deaths determines the quality of our lives. If we can learn to die peacefully, we can learn to live peacefully. Now, I stumbled upon this idea a few years ago when I was going through a particular struggle. A lot of people in my immediate family were dying, and they were dying back to back to back, and they weren't old. And I didn't know how to handle my grief, my sense of loss. The dilemma in me was being triggered over and over again, and it created an amazing sense of disease. So I went back to my research, which is my safe space, and I poured over thousands and thousands of hours of stories that I'd collected over the years. And I stumbled upon something that I'd never noticed before, and it was mainly because I wasn't looking for it. And it is that people use the language of death and grief and loss, whether they're talking about failing a class, breaking up with somebody, getting a scary diagnosis, or burying a loved one. And I figured it out. Since language is a sociocognitive signifier, you have to pay attention.
You can tell by the
What we
same
speak
monotone
is what we think,
narration.
and what we think is what we believe. And if we think and believe in our souls that we're experiencing death, then we are in effect experiencing death all day long. We are dying 1,000 deaths. So I got excited. I know you wouldn't think that you'd get excited about that, but I got really excited. So I went back to my data to find out the types of death we're dying as we live, and I found them. We are dying 4 types of death. Now, if you read this scale, the deaths decrease in frequency from left to right, and they decrease in intensity from right to left. We'll start with the left. There's something called everyday deaths. Everyday deaths are the most common types of deaths that we die. They are plentiful. They're microaggressive. They're developmentally sensitive. That means the types of everyday deaths you die at 10 don't really bother you at 30, but they grow with you. So here's some examples. An everyday death is when you're in a meeting and your boss calls on you to expound upon a point, maybe on a project, but you have no idea what she's talking about. You die a little death. Another everyday death is when the guy that you really, really like, he doesn't call you, he doesn't return your text. Another everyday death is when you get a rejection letter. The 5th one, you didn't get into any of the graduate schools you applied to. Then there are someday deaths. These are more altering, they're a little bit more intense. They are definitely based in relationships. So a someday death happens to everybody someday. It's when you have a falling out with your best friend, you stop talking. It's when you have a screaming match with your mother, you get all anxious and upset. It's when you end a relationship that you really thought was going to go the distance with somebody that you really cared about. Then there's the any day death. Now these are more traumatic. We're getting closer to the end of the scale here. And any day death has this lead up. They have these markers that tell you that they're coming, but they're still so traumatic that it doesn't matter. They always feel like a shock. So an any day death is, for example, when you have to bury your grandfather. An any day death happens when, for example, you have to file for bankruptcy because you lost your job, or when your husband walks out on you and you have to file for divorce. It's when you get a scary diagnosis. That's an any day death. Then this is the one we know well, the one day death. That's our literal demise. That's when our physical body expires and our soul goes where it will. Now, all of these deaths inspire violence because they all trigger our dilemma over and over and over again all day long. And if we don't manage these well, we're not living well. And they're never going to stop. We will never stop dying as we live. So what are we going to do? The key is to die peacefully. It's to become highly literate at dying peacefully. And I'm going to teach you how to do it. I'm going to introduce you to the 3 ways that death happens in your life story, and the 3 ways that you can mediate a peaceful facilitation of those deaths. Okay, let's begin. Any day now, you or someone that you love will be diagnosed with a scary illness. Or, God forbid, you may be raped. Or you will have to file for bankruptcy. When that happens, death will rise up as a monster. It will trigger your deepest fears and your deepest insecurities. Now, here's what we know about monsters. They're mute. They usually have no language. The purpose of a monster is to stare you down. The purpose of a monster is to intimidate you. It's to invoke foreboding. So 2 things are going to happen when you're confronted with your monster. First, you're going to have a physical reaction. Your head is going to start aching. You probably will close up in your throat. Your jaws will clench. Your heart will start palpitating.